What if I told you that the announcement Prince William and Kate Middleton just made wasn't supposed to happen for another 6 months? What if I told you that something erupted behind palace walls so suddenly, so violently, that William himself demanded a decision within hours, not weeks, not days, but hours? And what if I told you that the target of that storm, the person at the very center of this royal earthquake, was Meghan Markle? You're about to hear the story the palace hoped would stay contained. A story that has powerful people pacing marble floors at midnight, slamming doors shut, whispering into encrypted phones, and preparing statements that read like they were written with shaking hands. A story involving titles, lineage, constitutional triggers, and a sudden move by the future King of England that nobody saw coming. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. But before we dive in, let me ask you something directly. Have you ever watched a family feud reach a point where someone finally says, "Enough"? Have you ever seen a person pushed so far they stop trying to be polite and start trying to protect what matters most? Because that's exactly the energy behind today's royal bombshell. The palace didn't wake up today planning to make headlines. The palace woke up trying to stop something before it spiraled. And whatever happened, whatever reached William and Catherine's ears, forced them to do something unprecedented. Initiate an immediate review of Meghan Markle's royal titles. Immediate. Not scheduled. Not discussed. Not considered. Immediate. Why? Why now? Why this fast? Why with this tone? That's the mystery. That's the question echoing through every corridor in Windsor. That's the line reporters are scrambling to decode. And that's the reason today's announcement feels different from every public statement the Waleses have ever made. Because William and Catherine don't speak unless the ground has already shifted beneath their feet. So what exactly pushed them? Let's step inside. Imagine an early morning at Adelaide Cottage. The kind where the air feels heavier than usual, and staff members keep glancing at one another, sensing something is wrong even before the first phone rings. William has always been steady, controlled, a man who rarely lets emotion flood the surface. But today wasn't that William. Today was a version of him the public rarely sees, decisive, urgent, and visibly shaken. Sources describe Kate moving quickly but calmly, telling aides to bring specific briefing folders to the table, ones that hadn't been opened in years. Another staff member reportedly whispered, "We've crossed that point. This is it." No one clarified what it meant. They didn't have to. The tension said everything. And somewhere in that room, on the table between William and Catherine, sat a document. A document that would shape the next 48 hours. A document that would lead directly to the announcement you are hearing about right now. But we'll get to that document later. Right now, let's talk about why this moment matters. You've heard headlines about royal drama. You've read about disagreements, interviews, Netflix deals, memoirs, statements, counterstatements. The constant push and pull that defined the Sussex-Wales relationship for years. But this is different. This is structural, constitutional. A title review is not a simple PR correction. It is not a stern phone call. It is not a quiet warning from inside the palace. A title review is the royal equivalent of pulling the emergency brake. It means something has gone too far. It means the monarchy believes its identity, credibility, and public trust could be affected. And let me say this clearly. Title reviews almost never happen. They are so rare that many palace staff members have never witnessed one. You only reach for this tool when there is a belief that a title is being misused or could threaten the integrity of the institution. And today, for the first time in modern royal history, that tool is being aimed at Meghan Markle. The timing couldn't be more explosive. At a moment when King Charles is battling health challenges and the monarchy is under more global scrutiny than ever, the last thing anyone expected was William and Kate stepping up with a decision this drastic. Yet here we are. Which brings us to the biggest question of all. What was the breaking point? Because whatever happened wasn't minor. This wasn't triggered by tabloid gossip. This wasn't triggered by an offhand remark. This wasn't triggered by some snippy headline in a magazine or a petty jab in a podcast. This was triggered by an event. Something real. Something tangible. Something serious enough that William reportedly said the words, "not sustainable," during the closed-door discussion. Kate, for her part, allegedly used the phrase, "we can't overlook this anymore." Now think about that. These two, known for diplomacy, patience, discretion, reached a point where overlooking was no longer possible. That's not small. That's seismic. And that's why today's announcement doesn't feel like a message. It feels like a warning. But who is the warning for? Meghan? Harry? The public? The monarchy itself? Let's examine the timeline. Something happened in the last 72 hours. Something that generated frantic activity inside Kensington Palace. Advisors were summoned. Legal experts were consulted. Communication directors drafted multiple versions of the same statement. Even King Charles, who has been trying to maintain a more reconciliatory tone lately, was looped in earlier than expected. The speed alone tells you something major went wrong. But it wasn't just speed. It was the tone. The official language today was icy, clipped, almost surgical. Words like immediate review do not appear in royal messages unless they are chosen with absolute intention. Every syllable is weighed. Every phrase is debated. Every implication is considered. William and Kate know the power of their words. They know that one line can set off waves across the Commonwealth. They know that their silence is often louder than their voice. So when they speak with this tone, this urgency, you should be paying attention. Let me ask you something. How far must a situation deteriorate before the future king and queen step out of neutrality and into decisive action? How many warning signs must stack up? How many private conversations must fail before the palace stops whispering and starts moving? And here's another question. What did Meghan do, or what happened around her, that was so serious the palace couldn't let another day pass? Because if you listen closely, this wasn't just about titles. This was about influence, optics, public identity, the monarchy's global image, and most importantly, control. Control of the narrative. Control of the symbolism attached to the royal family. Control of the institution William will one day lead. And right now, according to the palace, Meghan Markle's actions crossed a threshold. You might be wondering, what threshold? What line? What trigger event? We're going to get there. But before we uncover that, let's talk about why William and Kate acted together. Normally, the Waleses operate in complementary but separate roles. William handles constitutional concerns. Kate manages public engagement. They balance each other. They move in sync, but not always in the same lane. Today, though, they acted as one. That's significant, and it hints at how serious this moment is. People who were present at the meeting said that Kate had a folder with her, a folder filled with notes she'd kept for months. Not gossip, not speculation, patterns, clips, behaviors that concerned her. She reportedly placed that folder on the table and said something that sent a chill through the room. A sentence that triggered William to shift forward in his chair with an expression no one could misinterpret. A protector, a future king, a father concerned about the future. Kate's sentence is something we will explore in the chapters ahead because it plays a crucial role in the decision to review Meghan's titles. But not yet. Not here. Right now, let's stay in the moment. The room. The tension. The sense that something had crossed a line. Because that's where this story really begins. Imagine aides passing documents back and forth, whispering about legal precedents dating back over a century. Imagine communication directors rehearsing statements that walk the razor-thin line between clarity and diplomacy. Imagine a stunned silence spreading across the table as someone reads aloud a line from a memo marked confidential. You can almost hear the weight of it. The realization that a decision had to be made. Not tomorrow, not after more discussion, but now. And here's where things get interesting. William reportedly said, "This cannot remain as it is." Kate nodded, and according to one witness, she added, "This affects the crown directly." Those two sentences were enough. A royal title review was initiated, and the public learned within minutes that Meghan Markle's titles were under immediate assessment, the first step in a process that could, if the findings are severe enough, lead to removal. Let that sink in. Removal. Not just questioned. Not just adjusted. Removed. Do you understand what that means for the monarchy? For the Sussexes? For the global media landscape? For Harry, who has always viewed Meghan's Duchess title as part of her protection and legitimacy. If that title goes, everything shifts. But the Waleses didn't make this decision lightly. Something pushed them. Something powerful. Something urgent. Something they believed could not be ignored for even one more news cycle. And that something is exactly what we're going to uncover. But not yet. Because before we reveal the trigger event, before we open the sealed memos, Before we explain the shocking line William used behind closed doors, we need to return to that moment inside Adelaide Cottage. The moment a single page of a document caused a visible reaction from the future king. If you're wondering what that page said, if you're wondering what detail made William lean back and say, "This changes everything." If you're wondering why Kate looked at him and quietly said, "You knew this would come eventually," then prepare yourself. Because what came next did more than change everything. It started everything. And no one, not even the palace, saw it coming. It started earlier than anyone expected. Before sunrise. Before the staff had even switched the hallway lamps to their morning dim setting. Before the smell of fresh coffee crept through the west entrance of Adelaide Cottage. Something was wrong long before the first call came in, because the people closest to William and Kate had already sensed it. You could feel it in the silence. Not the peaceful silence of early morning, but a sharp, brittle quiet, the kind that makes you glance over your shoulder because something feels out of order. The cottage, normally calm and predictable, felt like it was bracing for impact. You know that feeling, right? When you walk into a room and instantly sense that something important happened just moments before you arrived. That was the atmosphere hanging over Adelaide Cottage. And then, the first phone rang. Not the usual soft buzz used for internal calls. This was the secure line. The one reserved for emergencies, confidential briefings, requests from the king, or sudden situations that needed immediate attention from the future king and queen. The aide who answered reportedly froze for a moment. Not because of who was calling, but because of what they were saying. By the time the call ended, 2 other staff members had already been summoned. Something was happening. Something sudden. Something serious. Minutes later, William walked into the small briefing room. He didn't look angry. He didn't look tired. He looked focused. Sharply focused. The kind of focus that makes people straighten their posture and stop breathing for a second. This wasn't the William who cracks quiet jokes with staff during tea breaks. This wasn't the William who calmly manages protocol meetings. This was a William who had already made a decision in his mind, and the people around him were trying to catch up. Kate entered the room seconds later, quietly, gracefully, but with an energy that matched his. Her hair wasn't fully styled, her makeup not yet touched by her morning team, which alone told staff something was off. Kate Middleton doesn't walk into a high-level briefing without preparation unless it is genuinely urgent. She placed a folder on the table, a slim one. Yet every whisper from inside the cottage later suggested that whatever was inside that folder was heavy enough to shift royal history. Before we get to that, let's slow down and step fully into this moment. The true starting point of the announcement that detonated across the world just minutes ago. Because to understand why Meghan Markle's titles were suddenly placed under immediate review, you must understand the atmosphere in this room. You must understand the urgency, the tension, the electricity of something long overdue finally arriving at the doorstep of the future king and queen. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever seen 2 people walk into a room and instantly take control of it? Not through words or anger, but through sheer presence? That was William and Kate. They didn't shout. They didn't start issuing orders. They simply existed in that room with a gravity that made every aide straighten their papers and brace themselves. William took the seat at the head of the table. He didn't usually sit there unless the matter was constitutional or deeply serious. Today he sat. Kate sat beside him, not across, not diagonally, but directly beside him, signaling something important. They were a united front in this discussion. 2 steaming mugs of tea were placed on the table. Neither of them touched theirs. This was not a morning for comfort. It was a morning for decisions. William lifted the folder in front of him, not the one Kate brought, but another that had arrived shortly before they walked in. A thicker one. A folder containing the night's urgent findings from staff, reports, memos, security updates, and something else. A sealed page marked confidential. He slid it across to Kate. She read it. And for the first time that morning, the room felt a crack in its tension, a single sharp breath from Kate, so subtle most people would miss it. But one aide didn't miss it. That aide later said it was the moment they realized. This was bad. Very bad. William cleared his throat and began the meeting. You might expect him to start with anger or frustration or a long explanation. But that's not who he is. William is direct, controlled, precise. He said, "We don't have time to wait on this." That was it. 7 words. 7 words that meant the monarchy had entered crisis mode. Have you ever heard someone say something so simple, so calm, but so urgent that it sends a chill through your spine? That's what those 7 words did. The aides knew instantly that whatever was in those folders wasn't speculation or gossip. It was serious enough that William had decided delay was a risk. Kate nodded, calmly, firmly, and then opened her own folder. Here's where things become interesting. Kate's folder wasn't prepared by staff. It wasn't printed that morning. It wasn't something handed to her by an aide. It was her own, her personal notes, observations, logs, dates, public moments that she'd kept track of quietly, never mentioning them publicly, never using them against anyone. Kate isn't confrontational, but she is meticulous. So when she placed that folder on the table, everyone knew she hadn't done it lightly. She flipped to a page. Not the first page, but one marked by a small crease. She slid it toward William. A single sentence was underlined. An aide later described William's reaction as the closest thing to shock I've ever seen from him. What was the sentence? We'll come back to that later. Right now, let's stay in the room. The meeting moved fast. Faster than anyone expected. William asked the first question that hung over the entire morning. What are our options? Those 4 words signaled 2 things. He understood the severity of the situation. They were moving from awareness to action. The advisors explained the legal boundaries. They pulled out royal precedents. They referenced historical cases from as far back as Edward VIII. They connected dots between modern media influence and constitutional principles. They were clear. A title review could be initiated by the monarch or by the direct heirs with the monarch's approval. But the main point was simpler. If a title holder acts in a way that undermines, misrepresents, or threatens the credibility of the monarchy, the title can be reviewed, and if necessary, removed. And something Meghan had done, or something involving her, had crossed that threshold. What exactly was it? That's the cliffhanger history we'll remember. But for now, let's return to the cottage. The meeting intensified. A second aide entered the room with new papers. Kate read a portion aloud. William leaned forward, his jaw tightening. One advisor reportedly said, "If this is accurate, we have to move immediately." William's reply was simple, but sharp. "It is accurate. Do you feel that? The weight of certainty? The finality?" This wasn't speculation. This wasn't uncertainty. William knew exactly what he was doing. And that's what startled everyone. Because William isn't impulsive. He doesn't move fast unless he has to. He doesn't escalate unless something demands it. He doesn't push unless the monarchy itself is at risk. So if he believed immediate action was necessary, the situation was already past the point of repair. Kate then spoke. Calm, controlled, precise. She said, "If we delay, we risk making the situation worse." There was no anger in her voice, just certainty. Have you ever heard someone speak so quietly yet so powerfully that the entire room shifts? That's what Kate's sentence did. It reframed the meeting from a choice to a necessity. What could Meghan have done? What could have happened that would drive Kate to conclude that waiting would worsen the damage? We will discover that soon. But this is the moment where the balance tipped. William picked up a pen. He looked at the document in front of him, the internal protocol for initiating a royal title assessment. And he signed his name. Kate signed next. The aides left the room for a moment. And in that silence, William reportedly said something only Kate heard. A line from him that became the heartbeat of this entire crisis. A line that will matter enormously when the truth comes out. But not yet. Because to reveal that line now would undermine everything leading up to it. For now, just know this. That line was the moment the monarchy shifted. That line was the moment the Waleses moved from reaction to protection. And that line is the reason we are talking about an immediate review of Meghan Markle's titles today. The meeting didn't end there. It lasted another hour. Phone calls were made. A message was prepared for King Charles. Advisors were instructed to gather further evidence. Kate returned to her folder multiple times, pointing out patterns and concerns that had quietly alarmed her for months. By the time the meeting ended, the decision was made. The document had been signed. A private message had been sent to the king. A public statement was drafted. And the first step in the seismic process of reviewing Meghan's titles had begun. But here's the part no one expected. Before William left the room, someone handed him a second page. A page he hadn't seen yet. A page that contained information not in the initial folder. He read it. He blinked. He read it again. And then he said 4 chilling words that stunned everyone present. This changes everything again. What was on that page? Why did it shake him? And how does it connect to the bombshell announcement the palace made today? Because what happened next, just minutes after that page slid across the table, would ignite the monarchy's most dramatic internal crisis since the days of Diana. And no one, not even William, saw it coming. The message was marked classified, immediate forward required. Not urgent, not priority, not time-sensitive. Immediate forward required. That's the kind of language used only when the monarchy itself believes the information cannot wait another minute. It's the kind of stamp that makes senior aides stop mid-sentence, mid-sip, mid-breath. The kind that forces protocol aside, because the king must be informed now. This is the memo that landed on King Charles's desk that morning, just as the events inside Adelaide Cottage were unfolding. A memo so sensitive that only 3 people in the entire palace were authorized to handle it without gloves. And inside that memo was the spark, the detail, the piece of information that turned a quiet internal concern into a constitutional crisis. But before we open that memo, let's step into King Charles's study for a moment. The king had woken early, unable to shake an uneasy feeling he'd carried since the night before. Moments like these are rare for him. Charles is a man who holds his emotions behind a polished veneer, even with age softening his public edges. But that morning, even the curtains felt too heavy, the room too quiet, the air too still. He was reviewing diplomatic cables when the knock came. Not the usual polite tap. A heavier knock. A knock that meant one thing. Something's wrong. The king straightened, and an aide stepped in. Discreet, pale, holding the classified envelope with both hands, as though the very paper inside it needed protection. Your Majesty, the aide said softly. Charles didn't ask questions. He simply extended his hand. Have you ever witnessed someone receive news before they know the content? There's a shift that happens in their body, a tightening in the shoulders, a subtle inhale, a steadiness that says, whatever this is, I'm ready. That was the king in that moment. And then he read the memo. The first paragraph was enough to drain the color from his face. The second paragraph made him sit back in his chair. And the third paragraph, the one marked with a red bracket along the left edge, made him stop reading altogether and whisper a single sentence under his breath. It's come to this. Now let me ask you something. What kind of information would make the King of England say that? What detail could force him to acknowledge that the situation had reached a point of no return? Because whatever was in that third paragraph didn't just unsettle him. It validated everything William and Kate had been discussing minutes earlier. Inside the memo were 3 key points. A new development involving Meghan that posed a potential risk to royal reputation. Evidence confirming that concerns raised by Catherine were no longer speculation. A statement from a high-ranking advisor warning that if the palace did not act immediately and decisively, the monarchy could face a long-term credibility problem. Do you see the magnitude of that? Not a momentary PR challenge. Not an uncomfortable headline. A long-term credibility problem. For a monarchy built on symbolism, continuity, and public trust, credibility is oxygen. If that goes, everything goes. And that's why the classified memo didn't just inform the king. It ignited the next phase of a process that had been quietly building for months. Let's break down what really mattered inside that memo. The first section detailed the timeline. Events that had unfolded over the past 72 hours, some of which William already knew, others that had just surfaced. These weren't rumors. These weren't tabloids. These were verifiable incidents cross-checked by advisors, legal teams, and communication staff. One of the incidents involved a speech Meghan had given at a recent event. The speech itself wasn't the problem. It was a line within it. A line that had been flagged, analyzed, and deemed possibly harmful to the monarchy's constitutional position. But the memo didn't stop there. The second section contained something more serious. It referenced new footage, a clip circulating privately, not yet public, that showed Meghan using her title in a context that contradicted the palace's established guidelines. It wasn't illegal. It wasn't immoral. But it crossed a boundary the palace had warned the Sussexes about more than once. And here's where things take a turn. When the memo explained how this footage was being interpreted internationally, Charles paused. The concern wasn't about embarrassment. It wasn't about Meghan personally. It was about the ripple effect. The message the footage could send. The implication that a royal title was being leveraged in ways that blurred lines. The monarchy cannot function with blurred lines. And then came the third paragraph, the one marked with the red bracket. It contained a statement directly from a senior constitutional advisor. If this is not addressed immediately, the institution may find itself exposed to long-term reputational damage, particularly if the footage becomes public. Another advisor added, in a handwritten note, a review of the Duchess of Sussex's titles is now both reasonable and necessary. There it was. The sentence that changed everything. The sentence that turned Kate's quiet concerns into official constitutional grounds. The sentence that aligned the monarchy's legal advisors with William's instincts. But the memo didn't just present concerns, it presented options. And this is where the tone shifted. Because one of those options was something the palace rarely uses and almost never discusses publicly. Immediate title review. There are few tools more severe, more symbolic, or more politically sensitive. It means that a committee, the monarch, and senior heirs will investigate whether the holder of a title has acted in ways inconsistent with the responsibilities attached to it. Let me ask you directly, at what point does a monarchy decide to reevaluate a person's title? Not for scandal. Not for tabloid drama. Not for personal friction. Only when there is evidence, concrete, undeniable evidence, that the title may be misrepresenting the crown. That was the situation facing King Charles as he stared down the memo. Now picture this. Charles pressed his fingers against his temple. His breathing deepened. The weight of the situation and the implications for the future of the monarchy hit him all at once. He wasn't just reading a memo. He was inheriting a crisis. From down the hall, Camilla's footsteps approached. She entered the study, saw the king's face, and knew immediately that something was wrong. "What is it?" she asked. Charles didn't answer immediately. He simply handed her the memo. Camilla's eyes scanned the document. She, too, paused at the red-bracketed paragraph. When she looked back at Charles, there was no disbelief in her eyes, only resignation. "So it has begun," she said quietly. What exactly had begun? The moment when private royal tension became public constitutional action. Meanwhile, as Charles was processing the memo, back at Adelaide Cottage, William was receiving the same information through a separate channel. Kate was already piecing together how the memo tied into her own notes. Advisors were preparing a recommendation. And at that exact moment, an encrypted call connected William and Charles. Not a warm father-son chat. A meeting of the king and his heir. William didn't waste time. "You've received it," he said. Charles responded with a tired exhale. "Yes, and it's worse than we thought." Worse than we thought. Those are the kinds of words that make advisors glance at each other with concern. Because if the king and the heir both agree that something is worse than anticipated, it means the threshold for action has been crossed. They discussed the footage. They discussed the speech. They discussed the implications. They discussed the public reaction if this ever reached the media. And then Charles asked the question that no one expected so soon. "What do you propose we do?" William didn't hesitate. "Review the titles immediately." There was no anger in his voice. No frustration. Just certainty. A certainty that made the king lean back in his chair, weighing duty against family, the eternal burden of monarchy. Charles asked, "Do you believe this is absolutely necessary?" William replied, "It's unavoidable." That word, unavoidable. It became the unofficial beginning of the process. In the palace logs, the conversation is summarized in one cold, clinical line. Heir recommends urgent assessment. Monarch acknowledges necessity. The moment those two positions aligned, the machinery of the monarchy began to move. Now here's where the tension deepens. The memo included a fourth section, one that neither Charles nor William had seen in early briefings. A section added late in the night by a constitutional advisor who had grown increasingly concerned. This section explained, in detail, the potential long-term consequences if the palace failed to act. Public confidence decline. International confusion over titles. Legal disputes over misrepresentation. Strained relations with Commonwealth partners. Escalating media exploitation. And at the very bottom of the page was a sentence underlined twice. The integrity of the monarchy's public identity is at risk. For Charles, a man who spent his entire life preparing to preserve this institution, those words weren't just warnings. They were alarms. He knew the monarchy could withstand scandals. It could withstand family fractures. It could withstand public criticism. But credibility? Credibility is the one thing it cannot survive losing. By the time Charles looked up from the memo, the decision was clear. He told William, "Do what you must." And William responded, "Then it begins today." The memo didn't just reach the king. It exploded across the palace. Aides whispered. Advisors worked overtime. One senior staff member reportedly said, "This is the most serious internal action taken in years." And while all of this was unfolding, something else was happening behind the scenes. Someone, we still don't know who, attached an additional note to the memo before it was filed. A note with a single sentence. "There is more we need to uncover, and it concerns Catherine's findings." That sentence was the real bombshell, because it meant Kate's quiet observations over many months were not only accurate, they were relevant, critically relevant. The king, the heir, and royal advisors all reached one chilling conclusion. Kate had seen something coming long before anyone else realized. But what had she seen? What pattern had she noticed? What detail had she marked in her private notes that made advisors say, "Her findings require further investigation"? Because whatever Kate observed wasn't just a minor concern. It was the missing piece, the part of the story the classified memo only hinted at, and the shocking revelation the committee would confirm next. Because the memo may have started the process. But Kate's discovery? That's what would make it unstoppable. And you're about to find out why. What if I told you that long before the classified memo reached King Charles, Kate had already been quietly monitoring Meghan for months, if not years? Not in a prying, obsessive way, but in a methodical, analytical, almost protective way, because Kate understood the stakes. She understood that every word, every gesture, every public appearance could ripple far beyond the cameras, far beyond the tabloids, and into the very foundation of the monarchy. You may ask yourself, why would Kate care so deeply about Meghan's every move? After all, Meghan and Harry were no longer living under the same roof. They weren't performing daily royal duties. Yet Kate had a perspective most people outside the palace lack. She's not just a duchess. She's a mother, a future queen, a guardian of the institution. She knows what one misstep, one strategic, self-positioned moment, can do to the credibility of the crown. And that's exactly what she noticed. It started subtly. A tweet here, a magazine cover there, a charity event cleverly staged to coincide with a royal engagement. On the surface, these moments seemed innocuous, even admirable to fans of Meghan's media savvy. But Kate, meticulous as ever, noticed patterns emerging. Patterns that suggested something far more calculated than mere public appearances. Have you ever looked at someone and realized that their charm, their strategic presence, was masking a bigger agenda? That's what Kate saw. Not aggression, not malice, but positioning, influence, crafting a narrative, shaping perception. And when it comes to the monarchy, perception is reality. By the time Meghan announced her latest initiative at a Hollywood gala, Kate had already pieced together a timeline of strategic media appearances spanning months. Every event, every quote, every carefully chosen outfit, all creating a crescendo that pointed in one direction: visibility and power consolidation. Kate wasn't just observing a duchess on the rise. She was observing a potential threat to the monarchy's stability. Kate reportedly shared her observations in private notes. She cataloged events, analyzed patterns, cross-referenced them with official duties, and flagged instances that could be misinterpreted or, worse, weaponized against the institution. Some of these notes were personal, never meant for public consumption. But in hindsight, they became crucial evidence. Here's the first surprising fact. Kate's notes weren't just about Meghan's public engagements. They documented private interactions, meetings, and correspondence that, while seemingly benign, painted a picture of someone carefully curating influence outside the traditional royal sphere. Kate didn't need to speculate. She relied on observable data, dates, locations, media coverage, public statements, and the results were clear. Meghan was building a platform that extended far beyond royal duty. Now, let's pause for a moment. You might be wondering, Doesn't every royal build influence in some form? Isn't visibility part of their role? Absolutely. But the difference lies in intent. Kate noticed a pattern of selective appearances and messaging designed to enhance Meghan's personal profile, sometimes in ways that directly overshadowed royal engagements. She noticed timing that coincided with royal events, designed headlines that competed with official duties, and messaging that positioned Meghan as a global figure independent of her title. It's subtle, almost imperceptible to outsiders. But inside the palace, these nuances matter enormously. They're not just about optics. They're about authority, precedence, and hierarchy. And when you're dealing with an institution as old and tradition-bound as the British monarchy, subtlety can be a sword. Kate's concern wasn't personal. She didn't write in anger or envy. She wrote with precision, documenting potential risks to the monarchy. And it was this meticulousness, her habit of capturing patterns and assessing outcomes, that made her insights indispensable when the classified memo finally landed on King Charles's desk. Here's the contradiction that caught everyone off guard. Meghan's efforts were publicly lauded by many, praised as modernizing the monarchy, bringing attention to causes, and championing charitable work. Yet the internal palace assessment, informed by Kate's notes, painted a very different picture. It wasn't that Meghan's actions were wrong per se. It was that they were strategically timed, media-driven, and in some cases, seemingly designed to bypass traditional palace oversight. Have you ever been in a room where everyone sees something differently? One person applauds the action, another notices the consequences? That's exactly what happened here. Public opinion celebrated Meghan's visibility. Kate, quietly observing, flagged potential long-term risks. William, reading the memo, recognized the alignment between Kate's observations and the legal advisories. And Charles, receiving the memo, understood the gravity of the pattern. Let me give you an example. During a recent international charity gala, Meghan's speech, while inspirational, contained phrasing that subtly positioned her influence as independent of her royal role. She emphasized personal vision, global impact, and strategic partnerships outside palace protocol. To a casual observer, this is admirable leadership. To palace insiders, especially Kate, this was a signal, careful orchestration of influence beyond established guidelines. And it wasn't a single occurrence. Patterns emerge over time. Kate noted multiple events like this: speeches, social media posts, interviews, and even stylistic choices that cumulatively suggested a strategic approach to personal branding. While not explicitly violating protocol, they created a cumulative effect that posed a reputational risk, particularly if paired with unpredictable media amplification. Here's the twist. Kate's notes weren't shared immediately. She knew the palace valued discretion, and she knew timing was everything. But as events unfolded, particularly the incidents highlighted in the classified memo, her observations became the key lens through which advisors assessed Meghan's actions. In essence, Kate had anticipated what the memo formalized, that Meghan's public positioning had grown beyond acceptable boundaries. And here's the emotional beat that matters most. Kate's concern wasn't about Meghan personally. It was about the family, about the monarchy, about her children. The future king and the future queen understand that every public misstep affects not only the crown, but also the legacy they will leave. Kate's perspective was protective, not punitive. But it was also unflinching. She recognized that someone leveraging their title strategically, even subtly, could create situations the palace might be unable to control. Now, think about the layers of irony here. Meghan had spent years crafting a public image that blended celebrity savvy with royal poise. And yet, the very skills that earned her global attention became the source of internal alarm. What the public admired, visibility, charisma, influence, was exactly what Kate and senior advisors flagged as a pattern requiring review. Direct question to you. Have you ever noticed how perception shifts depending on perspective? The same action can inspire admiration to one audience and concern to another. In Meghan's case, the global audience saw charisma and modernity. The palace saw strategy and risk. And the intersection of these perspectives is where today's crisis began. Kate reportedly highlighted 3 specific patterns. Media timing that coincided with palace engagements. Public statements that emphasized personal agency over royal duty. Strategic use of appearances to reinforce personal influence globally. Each pattern on its own might have been harmless, but combined, they represented a trend, a trajectory that was undeniable. This was not random behavior. This was a calculated, sustained effort. And when the memo reached Charles, it corroborated Kate's concerns. Have you ever realized that someone you thought was acting independently might actually be influencing the course of events in ways you didn't see coming? That's exactly what happened here. Kate's foresight, Meghan's positioning, and the classified memo aligned to create a perfect storm. And here's the mini cliffhanger. One of the patterns Kate flagged directly led to the decision that William and Kate would act immediately, bypassing traditional delays. That single detail, buried in her notes and now highlighted in the memo, became the trigger for the emergency title review process. But what was it? Which specific behavior forced the future king and queen to move with unprecedented speed? That's the story we're about to uncover next. And it's a revelation that shocked even senior palace insiders when it came to light. That IT started with applause. Loud, sustained, and full of the kind of energy only a Hollywood gala can generate. Meghan Markle stepped onto the stage, poised, confident, radiating charisma, the kind that immediately draws every camera, every lens, every eye in the room. On the surface, it was a standard red carpet moment. The media loved it. Fans cheered it. Social media lit up instantly. And yet, inside the walls of the British monarchy, something very different was unfolding. You see, the same qualities that make Meghan a star, her timing, her messaging, her stage presence, were exactly the qualities that triggered a chain reaction of alarm in London. Kate, watching from afar through briefings, notes, and private communications, noticed a subtle, but critical, detail in Meghan's speech. Not the words themselves, inspirational, well-rehearsed, and charming. No, it was the framing. The phrasing implied autonomy beyond the traditional royal boundaries, an implicit suggestion that influence and impact were not contingent on title, rank, or protocol. Imagine this. Meghan, in front of an audience of global media and influencers, spoke of her vision in a way that positioned her influence as independent. She referenced partnerships and collaborations without the monarchy's oversight and framed personal initiatives as reflections of global leadership. To most observers, it was a perfectly executed speech. To Kate and her advisors, it was a warning. Have you ever watched someone give a speech and realized that every line had been meticulously crafted not just to inspire, but to shift perception? That's exactly what happened here. Every pause, every emphasis, every glance was deliberate. It wasn't accidental. It was a carefully orchestrated display of influence, the kind of influence that can ripple across continents and undermine traditional hierarchies. Kate reportedly made extensive notes during and after the gala. She documented every key phrase, every strategic positioning, every interaction Meghan had with the media and influential attendees. The timing of the speech aligned with palace events, the subtle positioning against concurrent official engagements, and the repeated use of language emphasizing personal agency over title authority all pointed to a pattern of strategic influence that had been quietly building over months. Meanwhile, William received a real-time briefing. Advisors flagged the speech as significant, not because it was controversial, but because it represented a continuation of a behavior that Kate had been monitoring for months. The consistency of this pattern, now on display before global media, validated the concerns documented in her notes and referenced in the classified memo. But here's the twist. What really alarmed William and Kate wasn't the speech itself. It was a short, seemingly innocuous line that Meghan delivered. One phrase that, when paired with the timing and context, signaled an escalation. She referred to herself as someone who could shape the world beyond royal boundaries. Think about that phrase for a second. Shape the world beyond royal boundaries. Not in service to the crown, not in alignment with the institution, but beyond it. To the casual audience, it sounded empowering. To those inside the monarchy, it was an alarm bell. The implicit message. Her title and platform were tools for personal positioning, potentially independent of the monarchy. Have you ever noticed how one sentence can completely change the meaning of a situation? How a subtle choice of words can escalate tension in a room you're not even in? That was the power of Meghan's phrase. William reportedly paused when he first saw the transcript of the speech. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly, absorbing the weight of what it implied. Kate, reviewing her notes simultaneously, recognized the alignment. The pattern she had documented, now corroborated in real time, demanded action. But let's step back for a moment. Why does timing matter so much? Why would a single speech trigger a crisis? Because timing, in this case, represented strategy. The gala coincided with official royal engagements, meaning Meghan's visibility risked overshadowing events carefully choreographed to uphold tradition and protocol. It wasn't just a matter of optics. It was a matter of hierarchy and perception. Every camera turned to her. Every headline amplified her independent influence, and every social media post reinforced the message. She was a global figure operating with autonomy. Kate recognized the danger immediately. This wasn't just about a single event. This was the manifestation of months of strategic positioning, the culmination of patterns she had documented. And for the monarchy, patterns matter more than isolated incidents. Patterns signal intention, behavior, and the potential for uncontrollable consequences. William, in consultation with advisors, began connecting the dots. Meghan's speech at the gala wasn't isolated. It was part of a series of coordinated appearances and statements. When mapped alongside previous engagements, interviews, and initiatives, it revealed a trajectory. A trajectory that suggested she was asserting influence in a way that could potentially bypass established royal structures. The palace's internal communication log indicates that within hours, advisors were drafting potential responses. Not statements to the public, not press releases, internal guidance, protocols, and recommendations for how the monarchy might address this trend. The classified memo was referenced. Kate's notes were highlighted. William's focus sharpened. The message was clear. Action could not wait. Have you ever been in a situation where waiting seemed safer, only to realize that delay could make things worse? That's exactly what William and Kate were weighing. A single day's delay could allow media narratives to take root, influence public perception, and make containment exponentially more difficult. And yet, even amidst the urgency, caution was necessary. The monarchy operates on balance. Every action has consequences, not only for the individuals involved, but for the institution itself. Decisions cannot be reactive. They must be measured, strategic, and supported by precedent. But measured does not mean slow. Not when the warning signs are flashing red. At this point, the tension inside the palace was palpable. Legal teams were consulted, communication experts were briefed, and advisors debated the implications. Every possible response was weighed. Every potential fallout was analyzed. And yet, despite the layers of procedure, the conclusion was unavoidable. The speech, in context, was more than a performance. It was evidence of a pattern that justified an immediate review of titles. But here's the emotional spike. Kate's notes had not only identified the pattern, they had predicted this exact escalation. When the classified memo arrived, confirming what she had long suspected, it validated her foresight. William's decision to initiate immediate review was informed not only by the memo, but by Kate's careful documentation and interpretation of Meghan's behavior. Have you ever witnessed someone act preemptively, anticipating events before others even recognize them? That's Kate's role in this narrative. Her quiet observation, her methodical attention to patterns, and her ability to connect seemingly minor events into a larger framework of risk became the foundation upon which the palace acted. And yet, even after all of this, there was a further complication. The gala, while intended to be a private, media-controlled environment, was partially recorded. Footage leaked. Clips circulated on social media almost immediately. The message, subtle, calculated, and influential, was now visible to the public. And that's when advisors realized something terrifying. Meghan's positioning could not be contained. The patterns had manifested publicly, and the palace's window for quiet intervention had nearly closed. The urgency became undeniable. A decision had to be made. The review could no longer wait. A title assessment, the kind that was rarely invoked and almost never publicized, had to be initiated. But here's the cliffhanger. While the palace prepared to act, Meghan herself was unaware that the event she had orchestrated a moment she likely believed was celebratory and empowering, had just triggered the most significant internal response of her royal life. And the question now became, how would she respond once she realized that her carefully planned positioning had forced William and Kate into action that could ultimately threaten her titles? It appeared online within hours. Just a short clip, no more than 30 seconds, yet it carried explosive potential. To the casual observer, it was nothing more than a snippet of Meghan Markle speaking at the gala. But to William, Kate, and the palace advisors, it was the spark that threatened to ignite a firestorm. Why? Because it wasn't the speech itself that caused alarm. It was the way Meghan used her title in that moment. A fleeting reference, a single phrase, that elevated her personal influence above the boundaries traditionally maintained by the monarchy. And while the public might see confidence, poise, and glamour, the palace saw a direct challenge to hierarchy and protocol. Imagine being inside the room when the clip first reached the palace. Phones buzzing, screens lighting up, advisors rushing to analyze every frame, every inflection, every gesture. The moment William and Kate saw it, the sense of urgency escalated. It wasn't hypothetical anymore. It was tangible, visual, undeniable. Have you ever noticed how one short video can change perception entirely? Something that might appear insignificant in isolation can, once magnified, carry consequences far beyond its length or content. That's exactly what happened here. The footage, circulating first on private social media accounts before spilling into wider networks, showed Meghan at the peak of her controlled performance. Cameras captured her smiling confidently, delivering her lines with precision, engaging with influential figures in the audience, and subtly framing her position as one of global authority. And then it happened. The phrase that would become the center of internal palace debates. Our work extends beyond the title we hold. Think about that. Beyond the title we hold. On its surface, it sounds empowering, visionary even. But within the walls of the monarchy, it was a red flag. The implication, influence without oversight, authority independent of structure, autonomy outside precedent. In other words, a subtle but undeniable challenge to established royal hierarchy. Kate reportedly saw the clip first, thanks to her network of palace staff and media liaisons. She immediately cross-referenced it with her own observations. The pattern she had documented, months of carefully monitored public positioning, was now publicly visible. What had been private concern was now a matter of public record, and the speed at which the clip circulated only added to the sense of crisis. William, upon reviewing the footage, reportedly leaned back and exhaled sharply. Advisors later recalled that this was the first time in weeks they had seen him visibly shaken. Not angry, not fearful, but tense. The tension of someone realizing that the situation had escalated beyond containment. Here's a question for you. How do you respond when a carefully orchestrated public act, designed to be controlled and celebratory, suddenly becomes evidence in a crisis you can't ignore? That was the dilemma facing William and Kate. The gala, which Meghan had intended as a stage for influence and global positioning, had become the trigger for a full-scale internal review. The palace acted quickly. Internal communications were tightened. Security reviewed the dissemination of media content. Advisors drafted talking points and contingency plans. Legal teams began assessing the implications of public perception. But even as they moved, the clip had already been seen, analyzed, and shared by global audiences. The genie was out of the bottle. Here's where it gets even more dramatic. The clip wasn't entirely malicious. There was nothing illegal, nothing overtly inappropriate. Its power lay in its subtlety. In the way Meghan's tone, gestures, and phrasing suggested that her role extended beyond the scope of her title. That subtle positioning, amplified through media channels, created a perception that she was asserting authority independently, a perception that could undermine the monarchy's carefully maintained structure. Kate, as always, approached this analytically. She documented the clip meticulously, noting timestamps, audience reactions, and social media engagement metrics. She compared it to similar events, noting consistencies and deviations. Every variable was recorded. Every implication was considered. Her conclusion was clear. This clip validated the pattern she had been tracking all along, and it demanded immediate action. William, for his part, recognized that the clip represented more than a PR challenge. It was evidence of a behavioral trend. The pattern Kate had identified, public positioning, strategic messaging, calculated appearances, was now fully substantiated. Advisors noted that the clip's timing and reach meant the monarchy could no longer afford a slow, deliberative response. Immediate review was necessary. And yet, there was still complexity. The public, for the most part, celebrated Meghan's poise and vision. Media outlets praised her ability to inspire and lead. To outside observers, there was nothing controversial about the clip. The challenge, then, was not the content itself, but the interpretation and the internal ramifications. Have you ever been in a situation where perception varies dramatically depending on perspective? That was the palace's predicament. To the global audience, Meghan's speech and the clip were a triumph. To the monarchy, they represented a potential threat to hierarchy, protocol, and authority. The contrast between public acclaim and internal alarm created a tension that demanded careful navigation and decisive action. Here's the twist. Within hours, the clip became a talking point among senior advisors and legal teams. Discussions focused not just on the content, but on the broader implications. Could Meghan's behavior set a precedent? Could it embolden others to act outside established boundaries? Could the monarchy maintain credibility if the perception of unchecked influence persisted? The answer, according to advisors, was no. The monarchy could not afford to appear passive or indecisive. Immediate assessment of Meghan's titles was necessary, both to uphold precedent and to maintain the integrity of the institution. Kate's observations, validated by the clip, became central to the advisory recommendations. William, relying on both the memo and Kate's notes, made the decision to initiate the review process without delay. And this is where the stakes became personal. Meghan, unaware of the internal response, continued her appearances and engagements, amplifying the very pattern that had triggered the palace's alarm. Every public moment, every media interaction, every carefully curated image contributed to the perception that she operated independently of royal oversight. Have you ever realized that your actions, however carefully planned, might unintentionally escalate a situation you don't fully understand? That's exactly what happened here. The gala clip, meant to celebrate and inspire, became the catalyst for a process that could redefine Meghan's position within the monarchy. The palace, meanwhile, moved rapidly. Security teams assessed potential leaks, communications teams drafted internal advisories, and legal counsel prepared the framework for a title review. In short, the clip had initiated a chain reaction that could no longer be contained. The response was deliberate, structured, and designed to maintain institutional stability, but the speed of the decision reflected the gravity of the situation. And here's the cliffhanger. While the palace worked to manage the fallout, a former royal aide reportedly contacted senior advisors privately, claiming knowledge of additional context that could further validate the necessity of the immediate review. The aide's revelation hinted at information that, if true, would escalate the situation far beyond the viral clip. What was this additional context? How did it connect to Meghan's broader pattern of public positioning? And what consequences would it have for the monarchy's decision-making process? All of that will be explored in the next chapter, the aide's confession, and the bombshell it revealed about Meghan's actions behind the scenes that came quietly. A call, brief, discreet, with a voice only senior palace officials would recognize. No one knew exactly how long the aide had held this information. No one knew why they chose that exact moment to speak up. But when the words came, they hit like a thunderclap inside the palace walls. "I have something you need to see," the aide said. Simple, direct, unambiguous. And immediately, alarm bells went off. This aide wasn't just any palace staffer. They had served in multiple departments over decades, moving from private secretarial roles to administrative oversight, witnessing decisions, observing private interactions, and collecting knowledge few others possessed. Their loyalty was unquestioned. Until now, because what they revealed wasn't speculation. It wasn't rumor. It was a confession. A truth kept hidden for years, suddenly surfacing at the very moment Meghan's pattern of public positioning had forced an immediate title review. Here's where the story becomes remarkable. The aide revealed a series of incidents, interactions, and decisions that directly implicated Meghan in activities the palace considered misaligned with traditional expectations of her role. Not illegal, not violent, not malicious in the way tabloids might describe, but subtle, strategic, and, in the eyes of William and Kate, concerning. Think about it. An aide waits years, perhaps decades, to come forward. Why now? What changed? The answer is both simple and extraordinary. The viral clip. Meghan's recent public actions validated the patterns the aide had witnessed. The timing, combined with Kate's meticulous documentation and the classified memo, created a perfect storm where silence was no longer tenable.